Victor's first love was cheated on and ended up divorced. He broke up with me without hesitation. That same night, he posted online. If only I could go back 8 years and stop Chloe from ever marrying that bastard. Chloe. The woman he had always loved. The one he could never let go of. And somehow, we really did go back. Back to 8 years earlier. He changed her fate. And I changed mine. By choosing not to stay with him. Chapter 1. I saw Victor's post right after finishing an 8-hour surgery. On my way back to the office, exhaustion hit me so hard I collapsed in the hallway. When I came to, I was in a dim club lounge, colored lights flashing, music pounding, someone patting my shoulder. Anna, your tolerance is terrible. One drink and you're already down? My blurred vision slowly cleared, and I recognized the person standing in front of me. Chloe. She was wearing a wine-red dress, her long hair softly curled, her face bright and striking. I stared at her for a few seconds, then stumbled into the bathroom. In the mirror, I splashed cold water over my face again and again. The scar on my forehead was gone. There was no denying it, I had gone back 8 years, to my freshman year of college. It was Chloe's birthday. I'd accidentally downed a drink that was far stronger than I realized and passed out on the couch for who knew how long. Still dizzy, I stepped out of the bathroom and walked straight into someone. Before I could apologize, a familiar low voice sounded near my ear. Sorry. Are you okay? My grip tightened instinctively around my phone as I looked up. Tall, straight posture. Sharp features. A loose black t-shirt. Victor. Our eyes locked for a few seconds. I ignored the unreadable expression in his gaze, lowered my eyes, muttered that I was fine, and walked past him. Back on the couch, I twisted open a bottle of water and took a sip. A moment later, Victor pushed the door open and walked in. Chloe slipped her arm around his and beamed at us. This is my brother, Victor. He goes to the university next door. The lights flickered across his face as he stood there, one hand in his pocket, giving a small nod. If not for that brief collision in the hallway earlier, this would have been our first meeting in my previous life. Victor, Chloe's stepbrother. The man I had loved and dated for 6 years. I realized he didn't love me on the day Chloe got married. He drank himself senseless, pulled me into his arms, and whispered her name over and over, gentle and dazed. Chloe. Chloe. In that instant, everything inside me went blank. It took a long time for it to sink in. Chloe. He was calling Chloe. She was the one he loved. And unfortunately, that was the time I loved him most. I sat outside all night in the dark. The next day, I pretended nothing had happened. I stayed with him. I kept believing what he had always told me. She's just my sister. Until later, after Chloe was cheated on and divorced, I heard her with my own ears, crying in Victor's arms, her eyes red and wet. I never loved him. It's always been you. You're the one I love. Do you still want me? She said her mother had a serious heart condition and had threatened to kill herself if they stayed together. That was why she had pretended to fall for someone else, why she had pushed Victor toward me. I didn't know whether any of it was true. But Victor believed her. That night, he came to find me. We stood facing each other in silence for a long time before he finally spoke, his voice hoarse. Anna, we should break up. I looked at his familiar, handsome face and didn't even get the chance to ask the question we both already knew the answer to before I was called in for an emergency surgery. I forced every emotion down, locked it away behind logic and professionalism. 8 hours later, when I stepped out of the operating room, the first thing I saw was Victor's post online. If only I could go back 8 years and change Chloe's fate so she'd never marry that bastard. Chapter 2. Now that I had come back, I began to notice all the details I had once overlooked, or chosen to ignore. The birthday cake Victor had made for Chloe by hand. The way he gently coaxed the bottle out of her hands when she refused to stop drinking. The way, after a party ended, Chloe drunkenly demanded to be carried home, and he didn't hesitate for a second before lifting her onto his back. My other roommates would watch and sigh, half teasing, half envious. Her brother treats her way too well. Back then, I had naively believed he was just being a good brother. So when Chloe later developed feelings for someone else and kept trying to push Victor and me together, I really did fall for him, the handsome, attentive, quietly gentle man he seemed to be. Only after the truth came out did I finally realize. None of that gentleness had ever been meant for me. Birthdays, anniversaries, he never cared much about any of it. Whenever Chloe was around, his attention naturally drifted to her. From beginning to end, the only person Victor had ever loved was Chloe. Just like now. I was in the back seat of his car with my roommates, half asleep. The car stopped at a red light. Victor glanced sideways, his gaze soft as it rested on Chloe, who was slumped in the passenger seat, drunk and asleep. A strand of her hair lifted in the night breeze. I kept still in the darkness, eyes barely open, pretending to sleep. In my blurred vision, I saw Victor slowly raise his hand toward her and whisper, almost too softly to hear, "Chloe, this time, I won't let you marry him." My heart slammed against my ribs. I closed my eyes again, sinking into the darkness, suddenly and painfully aware. Victor had come back too. He wouldn't let Chloe marry someone else. And I wouldn't be with him again. Back in the dorm, I lay on the bed that felt both familiar and strangely distant, the ceiling fan whirring above me, pushing out waves of warm air. I rubbed my aching head and drifted into sleep. In my dreams, everything replayed in an endless loop, the 8 years from meeting Victor to breaking up with him. Over and over, I heard the same words. "Anna, we should break up." A vibration from my phone dragged me out of the nightmare. I lay there blankly for a few seconds before picking it up and checking my schedule. That was when I remembered, at this point in my life, I had a part-time tutoring job, helping a high school student with English. I checked the time, hurried to wash up, grabbed a piece of bread, and headed out. Luckily, I was teaching English. Even after starting my medical career, I'd kept up with it because I needed to read the latest research papers. Flipping through my teaching materials, the familiarity quickly returned. My student was a high school girl. After going over the lesson I'd prepared, I started checking the essay her teacher had assigned. The topic was simple, me in 10 years. She rested her chin in her hands and asked, "Ms. Anna, do you think I could become a comic artist in 10 years? You can," I told her without hesitation. It wouldn't even take that long. In 8 years, she would become a hugely popular artist with a massive following. "And you, Ms. Anna, will you be a doctor by then?" "Yes." She made a small sound, then suddenly lit up and pointed out the window. A tall figure was walking beneath the trees, holding a black umbrella. "Then Mr. Ethan must have become a physicist too," she said with certainty. Through the curtain of rain, I lifted my head and met his eyes. My heart tightened sharply, memories rising before I could stop them. He didn't have 10 years. 2 years from now, he would die in a car accident. Chapter 3. His name was Ethan. He was the prized student of a notoriously demanding physics professor at the university next door, and a constant topic of conversation among the girls on campus. Good-looking, brilliant, effortlessly capable, people talked about him like he was perfect. The only flaw anyone could ever point to was his background. He'd grown up with very little. In my memories, our paths had barely crossed. We'd only run into each other a few times in the library. But the moment that stayed with me most clearly happened during my junior year, the day I went to the hospital to visit Victor. On my way back to campus, I was crossing the street with a group of pedestrians when a car came speeding through a red light straight toward us. People screamed and scattered. Out of nowhere, a black sedan shot forward and slammed into the oncoming vehicle, forcing it off course. Tires screeched against the pavement before both cars crashed into a guardrail. I ran toward them instinctively. I had only made it halfway when the explosion hit. Flames swallowed the scene in an instant, cutting off all visibility. The cicadas in the nearby trees fell silent for a heartbeat, and resumed their shrill cries, as if nothing had happened. No one inside survived. A shard of debris sliced across my forehead, leaving a scar. Later, the incident spread everywhere online. The investigation revealed that the speeding driver had lost everything to gambling and planned to take revenge on society. There had been gasoline stored in the car. The other person who died in the crash was Ethan. He had been driving his professor's car that day, sent to pick up documents from another university. He just happened to pass that intersection on the way back. Within hours, the internet had dug up everything about him. Photos of him spread everywhere. Some mourned his talent and his future, cut short. Others spoke about him like a hero. He saved so many people. At least his death had meaning. Besides, he didn't really have anyone, did he? It was true. He had never known his father. His mother died from illness during his senior year of high school. There was no one left to grieve him. The only thing that remained unfinished was the research project he'd been working on. For years afterward, no one was able to continue it. Once, I brought flowers to his grave and ran into his advisor, a heavy-set older man with graying hair. He stood there in silence as light rain began to fall, then let out a deep sigh. He had such a promising future. For a long time after that, I couldn't sleep. It felt like my heart had been submerged underwater, heavy, dull, constantly aching. I told myself it was guilt. Regret. A gentle tug on my wrist pulled me back to the present. When I looked outside again, Ethan was already gone. My student's voice rang beside me. "Ms. Anna, I've got physics with Mr. Ethan now. Don't forget what I said, tomorrow night. Don't be late." I hadn't actually heard her earlier. But memories from my past life surfaced on their own. Tomorrow was her birthday. Her parents were too busy to celebrate with her, so she'd asked me to spend the evening with her instead. The rain had stopped without me noticing. Sunlight pushed through the clouds, and suddenly I remembered something I'd read online after Ethan died. Tomorrow was also his birthday. Chapter 4. The truth was, Ethan didn't celebrate his birthday. Because the day he was born was the same day his father, a firefighter, died in the line of duty. He never even got the chance to see his son. I figured he probably wouldn't want to celebrate his birthday. But it was still the day he had entered this world. He shouldn't have to spend it alone. So the next day, I showed up at my student's house early, carrying a cake and a gift. Ethan was in the middle of teaching. Outside, the sun was setting. He stood beside the table in a simple white shirt, holding a sheet of paper, head slightly lowered as he went over a problem. Calm, composed, quietly refined. Seeing him like that, I was suddenly reminded of something I'd come across later. It was a screenshot of a chat conversation, no source, no way to verify if it was real. Just a few short lines. Someone had asked him, "Ethan, do you have someone you like?" "Yeah." "Then tell her." The next reply didn't come until nearly 3 minutes later. "Never mind." Most people didn't believe it. Someone who looked like him, who had everything going for him, how could he be the type to quietly pine for someone? But by then, he was already gone. The truth would never be known. And even if it had been real, that unspoken love would have stayed buried forever. A father he never met. A mother who died from illness. Feelings he never confessed. A future cut short halfway through. A sacrifice few truly mourned. There had been too many regrets in his life. A life fractured, unfinished, ending in haste. A genius from the physics department deserved better than that. By the time the lesson ended, it was already dark outside. My student rushed over, clutching the art supplies I'd brought her, and let out a small sigh. If Mr. Ethan didn't have plans, it could have been the three of us. I paused for a moment, then looked toward Ethan, who was packing up his things to leave. "Mr. Ethan, would you?" Before I could finish, the power suddenly went out. The entire room dropped into pitch-black darkness. I cleared my throat softly, forcing myself to stay calm. "Mr. Ethan, maybe you could stay a bit longer, we're not great with the dark." Silence filled the room. Then, click. A small flame flickered to life. Ethan cupped the lighter in one hand, shielding the flame with the other. The shifting light carved sharp shadows along his features as he looked up at me. "Okay," he said quietly. By the dancing glow, I placed the lit candles on the cake and held it out in front of them, speaking slowly, each word deliberate. "Today, we're celebrating the fact that you're here. That you're alive. May the rest of your life be safe and full of happiness." Setting guilt aside, no one wanted that future for him more than I did. The room stayed dim as we split the cake, the sweet scent lingering in the air. My student, spoon still in her mouth, ran into the study and came back with her report card, beaming. "Ms. Anna, my mom said I improved a lot this time. She wants to thank you by taking us out to dinner." I looked down at the rows of scores and remembered. This had happened before. In my previous life, Chloe had asked me to help with a photo shoot that day, and I'd politely declined the invitation. My thoughts snapped back. I looked at Ethan sitting in the soft shadows and suddenly realized. That dinner. That was the day we were supposed to meet. Chapter 5. But in the end, I never made it. On my way there, I rushed in to pull a child out of the path of an oncoming car and ended up injuring my leg. I was taken to the hospital. To prove I hadn't canceled at the last minute, I even sent a photo of the injury to my student's parents. It wasn't serious, just a scrape along the surface of the skin. It stung, but there was no need for hospitalization. While waiting for the doctor to treat my wound, I absent-mindedly scrolled through my phone and came across Chloe's latest post, photos from a photography club event. Victor was in them too. Of course he was. Whenever it was Chloe, he always showed up. I remembered our 4th anniversary. Chloe had gotten into a fight with her boyfriend, gotten drunk at a bar, and called Victor in tears. I feel awful, can you come stay with me? We had just arrived at the restaurant we'd reserved, hadn't even ordered yet, when he stood up to leave. I said I'd go with him. He stopped me. Chloe cares a lot about appearances, he said. She wouldn't want you to see her like that. And you? I asked. I grew up with her, he replied. It's different. Not long after Chloe got back together with her boyfriend, we were at a gathering when she leaned against him playfully and said, "You're not the only one who likes me. If you keep making me mad, I might just dump you." Victor sat nearby, quietly finishing his drink without saying a word. He must have known all along. Chloe knew how he felt, yet pretended not to. She kept accepting his devotion without guilt, while still being with the person she actually loved. As for me, Victor only ever needed one sentence to silence everything I might have said. She's my sister. And your friend. Thankfully, this time around, I wouldn't be their emotional buffer. I wouldn't be the extra person filling the space between them. After my wound was bandaged, I limped out of the hospital. Halfway down the street, it suddenly started to rain. The injury couldn't get wet, so I forced myself through the pain and hurried beneath the nearest building overhang, planning to call for a ride. Then my phone died. The late summer wind carried a chill. Just as I resigned myself to waiting for the rain to stop, Ethan appeared. He walked toward me through the rain, umbrella overhead. Without a word, he took off his jacket and tied it gently around my injured leg, then placed the umbrella in my hand. The next moment, he lifted me into his arms. "The road's narrow here," he said. "Hard to get a ride. Let's move somewhere else." I was too startled to react, leaning against him, catching the faint scent of citrus and the steady rhythm of his heartbeat beneath my ear. My gaze drifted from the line of his throat to the side of his face. Once we were in the car, I asked how he'd found me. He explained it simply. My student's mother had been worried but was tied up in a meeting, so she'd asked him to check on me. When my phone died and he couldn't reach me, he'd searched for quite a while before finally spotting me. The air inside the car felt humid from the rain, a little stuffy. I cracked the window open, trying to imagine how many places he must have checked. As the tension drained from my body, exhaustion took over. By the time I woke again, the rain had stopped and we were pulling up to the campus gate. Ethan helped me out of the car carefully, then carried me all the way to the dorm entrance. Before he left, I thanked him. He lowered his gaze slightly and smiled. "No problem, Anna." By the time I made it back to my room, I realized his jacket was still tied around my injured leg. Chapter 6. By the time I went to return it, autumn had arrived. Between my injury and the constant drizzle, I hadn't left campus much. The day I went looking for Ethan was a weekend, clear skies, bright sun. Only after I got there did I realize how reckless I'd been. I hadn't asked for his schedule. Hadn't even known which building he'd be in. Trying to find one person on a campus like that was like searching for a needle in a haystack. In the end, I didn't find Ethan. But I did run into Victor. As I was passing the basketball court, I heard shouting rise above the noise. "Call an ambulance." He passed out. Years of medical training kicked in before I even thought about it. I ran over, pushed through the crowd, and saw a student lying unconscious on the ground. I dropped to my knees immediately, checked his condition, and began CPR. About 15 minutes later, he started to come around. The campus clinic staff arrived soon after. I got to my feet slowly, ready to leave, when I noticed Victor standing across from me, watching. I had no idea for how long. He was in a red and black jersey, right in the middle of the crowd. I looked away calmly, picked up my jacket, and turned to go. Maybe I was imagining it, but I heard someone behind me ask, "Victor, do you know her?" "No." I carried the jacket with me and found the nearest dessert shop to sit down and rest, letting my strength gradually return. The wind chime on the glass door rang softly from time to time. Out of boredom, I opened a simple game on my phone and played while I waited. The chime sounded again. A figure stopped in front of me. I looked up. Ethan. The game over sound chimed from my phone, but I barely noticed. I smiled, surprised. What a coincidence. Of all places. He raised an eyebrow. Not really. I came looking for you. Before I could respond, he tapped his phone and turned the screen toward me. It was a post on an anonymous campus page, asking if anyone knew who she was. The photo showed me performing CPR on the basketball court. The caption read, "Anyone know who she is? ID her." It had been posted less than half an hour ago, and the thread was already flooded with comments. Most were just onlookers, but a few stood out. Look at that technique. She's probably from the med school next door. What's she doing on our campus? That jacket she's holding looks like a guy's. Is it her boyfriend's? Wait, does she have a boyfriend here? I stopped reading, feeling slightly embarrassed. I picked up the jacket beside me and handed it to him. It's been washed. That night, when I got back to the dorm, my roommate, who never missed a piece of gossip, immediately shoved her phone in front of me. Another campus post. Case closed, she's Ethan's girlfriend. The attached photo showed me handing the jacket to Ethan in the dessert shop. A pink filter had been added, making the moment look far more intimate than it really was. My roommate's curiosity was practically blazing. I quickly explained the whole situation from start to finish. After listening, she looked disappointed, then muttered, half resigned, "Still, looks promising. I'll ship it for now." I couldn't help laughing. Lowering my head, I glanced at Ethan's profile on my phone. His username was simply his name, Ethan. His profile picture was a white origami crane. After a moment's thought, I edited his contact name. Mr. Ethan. Chapter 7. His social media was almost empty. There was only one post. No image. Just a single line of text. The wind is picking up. The timestamp was the day we met. For some reason, I suddenly remembered a different timeline, 6 years after his death. The rain had just stopped, the sky washed clean, the last light of sunset stretching across the horizon as I brought a bouquet to visit his grave. My shadow fell across the headstone. I stood there quietly, looking at the calm, gentle face in the gray-toned photo. Then the wind rose. Loose strands of hair brushed against my shoulders, leaves rustling together overhead, the sound like the opening note of a new chapter in fate. And later, time turned back. We met. I was grateful I had returned to a point before I ever knew Victor. Compared to wasting time on revenge, I would rather become a stranger to him, someone with no connection at all. Just like he had said on the basketball court. I don't know her. Freshman year came to an abrupt end in a blur of chaos and urgency. If I remembered correctly, among the incoming students at the neighboring university, there would be someone Chloe would eventually fall for. He was Victor's junior. In my previous life, they met at a gathering Victor had organized. Chloe fell for him, then began nudging Victor and me together. In the end, after countless coincidences she carefully engineered, Victor was the one who asked me out. Now, though, he had come back to a time before Chloe ever met that boy. He would probably stop them from crossing paths. And eventually, he and Chloe would end up together. That was the ending I expected. But fate rarely followed a script. During the final exam before break, I sat just behind Chloe. I had finished my paper and was about to turn it in when she suddenly jerked awake from where she'd been dozing, shooting to her feet. She glanced at the test, then looked around wildly before grabbing the arm of the nearest student. "What year is it? Tell me, what year is it right now?" I watched her from behind, then quietly stood, handed in my paper, and left. Victor was waiting for her outside the exam hall. As I walked past him, he suddenly called out, stopping me. When I turned back, confused, he asked, "Are you with him?" I had no idea what he meant. "What does that have to do with you?" I replied. After that, because of the break, I didn't see him again for a long time. I had assumed that, having both returned, he and Chloe would finally choose each other and find their way to a happy ending. They didn't. Chloe didn't choose Victor. Even after coming back, she still fell for his junior. The words she had cried to him after her divorce in my previous life, those had only ever been a lie. What I didn't expect was this. This time, she didn't try to match Victor with me. She was trying to match him with Amber. The woman who, in the future, would be the one her husband cheated with. I had no idea what happened during that break. By the time we saw each other again, Chloe and Amber were already close friends. The night air was cool. I was walking back to the dorm with a stack of books in my arms when I spotted Victor and Chloe talking downstairs. I didn't stop. As I passed them, their voices drifted behind me. Chloe, I'll say this again. She's not a good person. You're too trusting. If you keep letting her stay close, she'll take advantage of you sooner or later. The next moment, Chloe's voice softened, coaxing. Come on, just trust me. You don't really know her yet. She's actually amazing. Why don't you just try dating her? Please? Chapter 8. Chloe made her relationship public 2 months later. It was a weekend. I was at a gathering when I ran into Victor, completely drunk. In the hallway outside the private room, just as I was heading back from the restroom, he suddenly grabbed me and pulled me into his arms. The sharp smell of alcohol closed in around me. When I realized what was happening, I struggled, but the more I fought, the tighter his grip became. His voice dropped low beside my ear. Chloe, why are you with him? He's going to hurt you someday. You were forced, weren't you? The person you really like, it's me. It's always been me. When resisting did nothing, I lifted my leg, ready to kick his shin. The hand pressing against my back suddenly disappeared. The next second, Victor was yanked away, his wrist caught and his body thrown hard to the ground. I nearly lost my balance from the sudden release, a startled sound slipping from my throat before a strong arm wrapped around my waist, steadying me. Ethan. He had been there for a group celebration, stepped out for some air, and happened to walk straight into the scene. Maybe the pain cleared his head a little. Victor struggled up against the wall, looking at me in confusion. Anna. There was nothing worth saying. I grabbed Ethan's hand and turned to leave. Victor's voice followed, edged with mockery. Feeling proud, Anna? I know you like me. Seeing that Chloe didn't end up with me, you must be thrilled, right? He let out a harsh laugh. And so what if you're with him now? He won't live long anyway. He's going to die sooner or later. I knew he was mixing memories from both timelines, his emotions unstable, words spilling out without restraint. I didn't care what he said about me. But he shouldn't have said that about Ethan. I stopped, turned back, and walked straight up to him. Meeting his scornful gaze, I spoke slowly, each word clear. Shut up, Victor. He's not going to die. Because I was here. I came back to change his fate. I couldn't return to the day before his father died in that fire. I couldn't save his mother from illness. But I had come back to now. And now. I could save him. We stepped out of the hotel. The sound of passing cars snapped me back to the present, and that was when I realized I was still holding Ethan's hand. His palm was warm, slightly damp. I froze for a second, then let go at once, clasping my hands behind my back, fingers tightening. Sorry. I forgot. And, thank you. For earlier. His hand, hanging at his side, curled slightly into a loose fist. He lowered his gaze toward me. What he said just now. My heart jolted. I cut him off before he could finish. He was drunk. Just talking nonsense. Don't take it seriously. Ethan, you're going to have a brilliant future. You have a long life ahead of you. We looked at each other in silence for a few seconds. Then he smiled, light, easy, almost relieved. And you, Anna? You'll become a great doctor someday, right? For a moment, I didn't speak. Then I smiled back, bright and certain, and nodded. As long as I'm alive, I'll do everything I can to heal people. Chapter 9. In the end, Chloe never succeeded in setting Victor up with Amber. But Amber had already started pursuing Victor, and she wasn't planning to let go. In a way, Chloe had achieved her goal. With Amber now fixated on Victor, she probably wouldn't be the woman who wrecked Chloe's marriage in the future. The one thing she hadn't expected was that Victor had come back too. And Victor, stubborn as ever, still believed the words Chloe had told him in the previous life. That lie had become his oxygen tank, the thing keeping his love alive even as it slowly drowned him. In the end, the person who shattered that illusion was Chloe herself. It happened at a gathering I didn't attend. That night, when my 2 roommates returned to the dorm, they described the scene to me with complicated expressions. Chloe got drunk and slapped Amber. We couldn't even hold her back. She kept calling her a shameless homewrecker. The more her boyfriend tried to stop her, the more hysterical she got. But the weird part was, her brother stayed unusually calm. He just stood there watching her lose it. I was startled for a moment, then opened my mouth, only to close it again without saying anything. Victor hadn't been calm. He'd been done. He must have realized then that Chloe had come back too, and that instead of choosing him, she treated him like a tool, someone to keep Amber occupied. To her, Victor was nothing more than that. A joke. After that, I didn't see him go looking for Chloe again for a long time. But Chloe didn't seem to care. I did run into him a few times when I went to the neighboring campus to see Ethan. The most vivid memory was the day Ethan and I went to try a newly opened restaurant off campus. As we passed an outdoor grill stand, a fight suddenly broke out. Victor was in the middle of it. The scene exploded into chaos, shouting, screaming, glass shattering. A smashed beer bottle flew straight toward me. Ethan reacted instantly, pulling me into his arms. The shard grazed his cheek, leaving a thin line of blood. Ethan. He guided me into a dumpling shop across the street and said gently, "I'm fine. Don't worry." The commotion outside died down before the police arrived. I used bottled water to clean the cut, then pulled a small green cartoon bandage from my pocket. I leaned in, carefully placing it over the wound. When the door swung open, Victor walked in. Several others from the fight followed behind him, probably his friends, each carrying their own injuries. There was still a smear of blood at the corner of Victor's mouth. As they cursed loudly about the other side of the brawl, I kept my head down, quietly finishing the bandage on Ethan's cheek. Then Victor suddenly kicked a chair, his voice sharp with pent-up anger. "Shut up already." The next day, he stopped me on campus. Light snow was falling. Bruises still marked his face, and the look in his eyes was complicated. "Anna," he said, "you and him, it's not going to work out. Just a piece of advice. Don't fall for him." My expression cooled. I turned away and tossed back a reply. "I'm not a psychiatrist. Go find someone else." Behind me, his voice followed a casual, almost teasing, but edged with something darker. "Anna, the person you were supposed to like was me." Chapter 10. My life had always been smooth, almost uneventful. The only real misfortune I'd ever had was meeting Victor and Chloe, and wasting 6 years of my feelings on them. And Ethan, he was the one person I owed a life to. When I first came back, I thought I had been given a second chance to change the fate that tied me to Victor. Later, I realized that wasn't it at all. One afternoon near the end of my sophomore year, I woke from a nightmare, heart racing. In the dream, I was back at that intersection. As I crossed with the crowd, a speeding car came straight at us. In the chaos, I watched helplessly as a black sedan swerved in to block it. And then the explosion came. The old ceiling fan above me spun loudly, stirring my hair. I lay there staring at the ceiling, mind blank. I had always known this was an unsolvable problem. Aside from the driver's motive, revenge against society, I knew nothing about him. No identity. No clues. I could save Ethan. I could avoid that intersection. But what about the elderly, the children, the pregnant women, the students who would be there that day? Once, after thinking myself in circles, I tried the 1 in a million chance of going to the police. The response I got was blunt. "Miss, have you been watching too many sci-fi movies? We deal in facts, not fantasies." In early June, final exams arrived, and Ethan and I both stopped tutoring. By then, we had known each other for nearly 2 years. I had never seen him around any particular girl, never heard him mention anyone special. The screenshot about his secret crush was most likely fake. Sometimes I tried to imagine the kind of girl he might fall for. Maybe someone beautiful. Maybe someone brilliant. Maybe someone just as exceptional as he was. Whoever she was, she would surely be someone wonderful. That night, my students' parents invited us out to dinner again to thank us. By the time it ended, the sky was dark. Ethan and I walked down a narrow street washed in moonlight. Maybe it was because I knew the road would end in parting. Or maybe the night always had a way of stirring something quiet and heavy inside people. As we passed beneath a dim streetlight, I spoke, pretending it was just casual conversation. "Ethan, is there someone you like?" He was silent for a long time before answering, not directly. "Why do you ask?" "If there ever is, you should tell her," I said. "Don't keep it to yourself. Don't just admire her from a distance. Say it out loud. There's always a chance." We had stopped at the intersection by then. He suddenly turned to me, his expression serious, and said quietly, "Anna, thank you." I assumed he was thanking me for the advice and didn't think much of it. Life went on as usual after that. Until the day before the accident. His advisor asked him to drive out the next day to pick up some documents. When I heard, I asked if he could go in the afternoon instead. A friend had given me 2 movie tickets for the morning. He said yes. I picked the movie at random. Coincidentally, it was about time travel. The synopsis said the heroine returned to the past to make up for the hero's regrets. They fell in love, only for her to wake up and realize it had all been a dream. I never saw the ending. Halfway through, I leaned toward Ethan, who was watching intently, and told him I needed to use the restroom. It was as ordinary as any other day. But once I stepped out of the theater, I got into the rental car and drove straight toward that intersection. On the way, it finally hit me. Our meeting had always been meant for this. Goodbye, Ethan. This time, you'll be the one to see the future. Later, I stood at the intersection, watching the familiar crowd begin to cross the street, waiting for that car to appear. And then, an explosion went off nearby. My heart jolted. My mind went blank for a split second before I jumped out of the car, dialing Ethan's number as I ran toward the explosion. The phone kept ringing. No answer. I stood before the burning wreckage, my vision slowly blurring, mist gathering in my eyes. The dizziness swallowed me whole. And the last thing I remembered was this. I still hadn't managed to save him. Chapter 11. I woke up in a hospital room. The sharp scent of disinfectant filled the air. My phone lay beside the pillow. A white coat hung nearby. A familiar nurse moved about the room. Everything was telling me the same thing. It was 8 years later. The nurse said I'd only been unconscious for 20 minutes. I stared at the gauze curtain fluttering in the breeze, unable to tell if I just dreamed the past, or if this present was the dream. I got up and rushed into the bathroom, splashing cold water onto my face. The moment I saw my reflection, I froze. The scar at my temple was gone. That was when I knew. I really had crossed back. With trembling fingers, I opened my browser and searched for the accident. There was only a brief mention buried in an old, obscure report. No trending headlines. No trace of Ethan. No memorial. Nothing. I asked people, one after another. Did they remember the accident from 6 years ago, the one that had dominated the headlines? Did they remember the college student who had sacrificed himself and saved so many lives? The answers were always the same. Are you remembering wrong? There might have been an accident, but I don't recall it making national news. I don't know. 6 years ago is a long time, maybe I just didn't notice. Or I forgot. Ethan had no family. His classmates had scattered across the country long ago. The only place left was his university. I went there, hoping to find his advisor. But I was told he had moved overseas. There was no one left. No person, no trace, no record tied to Ethan anymore. The only proof that we had ever known each other was still on my phone. His contact. Our message thread. The last message, sent the day before the accident, 6 years ago. His reply agreeing to go see that movie with me. After that, 6 years of silence. I typed and deleted messages in that chat over and over, but in the end, I couldn't bring myself to send anything. I was afraid it would become a message that would never receive a reply. As long as I didn't confirm it, I could still believe he was alive. I developed a habit of walking around the neighboring campus whenever I had free time. More often than not, I found myself drifting toward the lake we used to pass. Ethan's lab was on the first floor nearby. Through the clear glass windows, I sometimes thought I saw a slender figure in a white coat standing at the bench, head bent as he recorded data. And then, the image would vanish. Victor came to see me the very next day after I returned. He said we didn't have to break up after all. That it had all been impulsive. That I should trust him again. I stopped writing the patient notes in front of me and looked up at him calmly. Victor, I asked, were we ever together? The color drained from his face. The truth was, he had no proof. There was nothing to show that we had ever been in a relationship. When we returned, it wasn't just the headlines about Ethan's sacrifice that disappeared. The 6 years I had spent with Victor were erased too. Fate had sent the 4 of us back to 8 years earlier. He had wanted to change Chloe's fate, to stop her from marrying the wrong man and to be with her himself. So he rewrote our relationship with his own hands. Even when he finally realized he'd only been used, it didn't change the truth. He and I had nothing left tying us together. After that, Victor went almost mad trying to prove that we had once been together for 6 years. But every attempt led nowhere. We weren't connected on social media. In every photo he had, he was alone. Friends from our separate circles no longer recognized each other. Even security footage from places we used to go showed no trace of me. As time passed, the gossip around the hospital shifted into quiet sympathy. Such a handsome guy, how did he end up like this? I only smiled and, when Victor showed up again, said gently, "Psychiatry's down the hall to the left. You might want to get checked." Since I refused to acknowledge that we had ever been together, the only person who still knew the truth was Chloe. And after coming back, she was cheated on again. Even though Amber never got involved with her husband this time, someone determined to cheat would always find a way. During the period when Victor was obsessively trying to get me back, Amber clung to him, and Chloe did the same, desperately playing the victim, telling him how much she loved him, how helpless she'd been. At first, Victor responded with indifference. Then impatience. Until one day, after he refused to see her, she came to the hospital and made a scene in front of me. I watched her quietly, then called security to escort her out. As they held her back, I told her the same thing. "Psychiatry's to the left. You should go too." My colleague sighed again. "Runs in the family, I guess." Things went quiet for a while. The next time I saw them was about a month later. I was heading to the lab to pick up some test results when I spotted Victor in the distance, furiously throwing a stack of papers at 3 people standing across from him. I didn't pay it much attention and walked away. Later, I heard the story from coworkers. Chloe had been relentlessly pursuing Victor. When her mother found out, she stepped in and stopped it outright. The words she used that day, Victor had overheard them. A blood test confirmed it. They were half-siblings. Same father. Born just 3 months apart. Which meant Victor's father had cheated while his mother was pregnant. The lie Chloe once told him, that her mother had threatened her life to stop them from being together. After all the twists and turns, it had somehow become the truth. In mid-May, I was invited to a university to give a lecture on emergency first aid. The hall was packed. When it ended, I gathered my things and was about to leave when, through the crowd dispersing below the stage, I caught sight of a familiar figure. Before I could get a clear look, he was gone. By the time I stepped out of the auditorium, it was already dark. A light rain had begun to fall. I hesitated for a moment, then raised my folder over my head and prepared to dash into it. When a black umbrella appeared above me. A faint citrus scent drifted from behind. Water slid down the tilted edge of the umbrella. My heart skipped. After a long pause, still holding the folder over my head, I slowly turned around. Standing there was Ethan. 6 years since I'd last seen him. Just as before. Sharp eyes. Cold, defined features. The clean line of his jaw unchanged. Chapter 12. After the explosion, Ethan was taken overseas by his professor for treatment. He remained in a coma for nearly 2 years. After waking up, he stayed abroad to recover and continue his studies. Only recently had he returned to the country, joined a research institute, and become a professor in the university's physics department. That was how he summarized 6 years of his life in just a few simple sentences. I blinked. All the words I wanted to say eventually condensed into only 2. That's good. He was alive. That was all that mattered. Once Professor Ethan. Now Professor Ethan again. The only thing that hadn't changed was how popular he still was with female students. Rumor had it his lectures were so crowded people had to stand just to listen. Out of curiosity, I once tried to sit in on one during my free time. Unfortunately, he had swapped classes with another instructor at the last minute, and I hadn't known. By the time I realized, it was too late. I wanted to slip out quietly, but I had chosen a seat in the inner corner by the window. Standing up would have drawn attention from half the room. After struggling through half a class, I had just sent Ethan a message when the professor suddenly called on me. I stared at the geology question on the board, completely lost. Taking a breath, I was about to apologize and admit I had walked into the wrong class when a low voice came from behind me. "Hey Dian." I repeated it instinctively. The answer was correct, and I sat back down. On my phone, Ethan hadn't replied. Thinking it must have been the student behind me who'd helped, I turned around quietly to thank him, only to meet a familiar, striking face. Ethan. He was wearing a black hoodie, the hood pulled casually over his head. His bangs were pressed low, shadowing part of his eyes. For a moment, it felt like I was looking at the version of him from 8 years ago. I turned back quickly, still stunned. Just as I was about to ask why he was here, my phone buzzed. A message from him. I happened to see you walk into this classroom. I was curious what kind of class could get Dr. Anna to show up in person. Above it was the message I had sent a few minutes earlier. I meant to sit in on your lecture, but I think I walked into the wrong classroom. What should I do? My phone buzzed again. Another message appeared. Oh. So this is my class. 6 years had changed him in subtle ways. He was still distant, still cool, but the restraint he once carried seemed to have softened. From that day on, my relationship with Ethan returned to what it had been 6 years earlier. And yet, something about it was different. At first, I couldn't quite put my finger on what it was. Until one day, when I went to campus to find him and accidentally overheard a conversation. It sounded like one of his colleagues, sighing heavily, caught up in a romantic dilemma. Professor Ethan, how do I get her to realize I like her? He let out another long sigh. You probably wouldn't understand. You don't have this kind of problem. Ethan didn't respond. The man continued, come to think of it, you've turned down so many people. Do you already have someone you like? I held my breath. Then I heard a quiet answer. Yes. I didn't make a sound. I simply turned and left. 6 years was long enough for countless things to change. Chapter 13. I'll admit it, I liked Ethan. As for when that urge to make up for the past had quietly transformed into something else, I could no longer trace the exact moment. Back then, it was something I knew would never lead anywhere, so the only choice was to keep it buried. Until 6 years later, when spring finally came, and everything bloomed all at once. After that, for a long time, I used work and overtime as an excuse to see him less, keeping a careful distance between us, neither close nor completely apart. Until he showed up at my consultation room 3 days in a row. A little helpless, I finally told him, Ethan, you don't have to come every day. Stubborn and serious, he replied, I made an appointment. What I mean is, you don't need to come in every day for treatment. It's not serious. He fell silent for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was low, restrained. Actually, I'm not here to see a doctor. Before he could finish, the door burst open and a man rushed in, gripping a knife. I recognized him. Not long ago, he had beaten his wife so badly she overdosed on medication and died despite emergency treatment. Ever since, he'd blamed the doctors for her death. Now he stood there, eyes wild, brandishing the knife and shouting at me, you killed my wife. The room descended into chaos. In the end, the man was restrained, but Ethan was injured protecting me. The wound was on the back of his shoulder. It took 10 stitches. I stood by his hospital bed, looking at his pale face. My nose suddenly stung, and my voice came out hoarse. I'm sorry. Whether in the past or now, he always seemed to get hurt because of me. Half a month later, I drove him home from the hospital. Carefully, I suggested, I could hire a male caregiver for you. Otherwise, people might get the wrong idea. He was typing on his phone with one hand. At my words, his fingers paused. He turned to look at me. What kind of wrong idea? The car fell into silence. A breeze slipped in through the window, stirring the loose strands of hair at his forehead, sending faint ripples across the calm surface of my thoughts. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel and kept my eyes on the road, saying nothing more. In the end, since he refused to let a stranger into his home, I took responsibility myself. In truth, he didn't need much care. I simply prepared lunch before leaving for work each morning, ate breakfast with him before heading out, and came back in the evening to have dinner together. Over time, a strange feeling began to grow inside me. One night, I had to attend a coworker's birthday gathering I couldn't decline. I called him in advance to say I'd be home late. Later, my car broke down, and a male colleague who happened to be heading the same way dropped me off downstairs. The moment I opened the door, a faint sour smell drifted toward me. Ethan was sitting at the dining table, poking at the food in his bowl. What are you eating? I asked. He looked up, expression calm, voice even. Can't you tell, he said. I'm eating jealousy. I froze for a second. When I walked over and looked, it was just a takeout order of dumplings. The small dish in front of him was filled to the brim with vinegar. I made him a fresh bowl of noodles, opened the window to air the place out, and reminded him, don't eat like that next time. The vinegar smell is way too strong. He lowered his eyes and ate quietly without saying a word. The next day, a colleague came to visit him, the same professor who had once asked whether he had someone he liked. The truth I had been deliberately trying to forget surfaced again. Ethan liked someone. I didn't know what that professor said to him, but something in Ethan's mood shifted afterward. Then I caught myself feeling annoyed at how closely I was paying attention to him. So that evening at dinner, I said, "Your wound's almost healed." He glanced at me and gave a quiet After dinner, I went into the bathroom to run warm water for him, habitually reminding him not to let the wound get wet. As I turned to leave, my foot slipped and I nearly fell. At the last second, he pulled me into his arms. The pounding heartbeat was so loud I couldn't tell whose it was. After a few seconds, I tried to pull away, but his arm tightened around my waist, holding me firmly in place. Steam filled the bathroom, and where our bodies touched, heat seemed to rise little by little. He looked down at me, his expression different from usual, something turbulent flickering in his eyes. His voice was low and hoarse. "Anna. I need to confess something." "What?" "I have improper thoughts about you." My mind went blank. The rising warmth burned through what little rationality I had left. Instinctively, I blurted out the conversation I'd overheard before. Someone had asked if he liked anyone, and he had clearly said yes. The next second, he turned me around, pressing me lightly against the sink, one hand still gripping my waist. With the other, he wrote slowly on the fogged-up mirror, stroke by stroke. "Yes, you." Chapter 14. Not long after Ethan and I got together, I finally asked the question that had been buried in my heart for years. Why hadn't he contacted me once during those 6 years overseas? He was sitting on the couch reading a physics journal. When he heard me, he pulled me into his arms. The faint scent of grapefruit lingered on him, and I heard his low, rough voice. "I was afraid." Before I could respond, he continued, holding me tighter. "Afraid I'd end up disabled and not good enough for you. Afraid that if I reached out, I'd start wanting more. And most of all, afraid you might already have someone you loved." In the quiet space between breaths, a wave of emotion rose in my chest, stinging the corners of my eyes. I wrapped my arms around him and said, deeply moved, "Ethan, you're incredible. To have walked such a difficult path and still made your way back to me." There was a brief silence. Then his hand slid down along my waist, and he let out a low chuckle. In a slow, teasing voice, he asked, "I can be even more impressive. You want to find out?" My mind went completely blank. The tender atmosphere shattered instantly. After that, Ethan made a point of proving just how impressive he was personally, repeatedly, and would always stop halfway to ask if I thought so. I never answered. And he never stopped asking. The first time Ethan took me to meet his parents was about 6 months into our relationship. Standing in front of the gravestone, I was a little taken aback. The woman in the photo was gentle and beautiful, but in the end illness had worn her down until she was almost unrecognizable. I had been there when she passed away. My mother had been her attending physician. Back in my senior year of high school, every time I went to the hospital to find my mom, I would see that auntie. If my mom wasn't in her office, I'd wait in her room instead. After a while we grew familiar. I cut fruit for her, folded paper cranes, and kept her company. She passed away shortly before his final exams. It was the first time I had ever faced serious illness and death up close. For the first time, I understood why my parents, who worked at the hospital, never had time for me. When it came time to choose a major, I picked medicine, the subject I used to hate most. Back then, I thought cancer was the only thing that couldn't be cured, and I wanted to find a way to fight it. Only after studying medicine did I realize how few diseases can truly be cured. What I never expected was that she was Ethan's mother. On the way back, I leaned against the car window, watching the trees blur past, and said quietly, "Ethan. I met your mom a long, long time ago." He answered calmly, "I know." My heart stirred. I wondered if he had seen me back then, too. I ran into Victor again half a year later, one evening. Ethan texted that he'd arrive in 10 minutes. I changed and got ready to leave work, only to find Victor in the elevator, pale, noticeably thinner. We were the only two inside. In the heavy silence, the elevator reached the first floor. I walked straight out, but he suddenly grabbed my arm. Lowering his gaze, he asked, "Anna, can we talk?" I frowned and pulled free. "Victor, let's not waste each other's time." As if he had expected that answer, he let out a self-mocking laugh. "You probably won't believe this, but on another timeline, we were together for 6 years." I couldn't be bothered to respond and turned to leave. Behind me, his voice dropped. "Too bad I didn't treat you well." I lost you. My steps faltered for a second, then I kept walking. By the flower beds outside the hospital, Ethan was waiting for me. In the glow of the setting sun, I suddenly remembered the second time a student's parent had invited us to dinner. I had arrived early and thanked her for checking on me when I was injured and hospitalized. She had looked confused and said, "I didn't ask Ethan to visit you. I just mentioned why you couldn't make it." After that, he said something came up at school and left. So, that was what had happened. My train of thought broke when my fingers were taken into his. He brushed a strand of wind-tangled hair behind my ear. I slipped my arm around his and leaned lightly against his side. Warmth and happiness bloomed quietly in my chest. "Ethan, the wind's picking up."
Extra chapter Ethan. People online were right. I had no one. If one death could save that many families, then mine was the better choice. I wasn't as noble as they made me out to be. The instinct to survive is human. I was afraid of dying too. But if someone I cared about was part of the equation, I would choose my death for her life without hesitation. When I regained consciousness after the explosion, I found myself trapped inside a cemetery. At first, on every anniversary of my death, the people I had saved, and even some strangers from the internet, would come. What I heard most often were words of gratitude and praise about how meaningful my death had been. Later, the only one who still came was Anna. She rarely spoke. Most of the time, she would place flowers in front of the headstone, clean the ground around it, and then sit quietly for a while. The first sentence I ever heard from her came on the 4th anniversary of my death. By then, no one else visited anymore. In the misty rain, she stood in front of my grave, looking down at my photo, and said softly, as if making a promise, "Ethan, don't worry. I won't forget you." It was the first time she had called me by name. I could never have imagined that the way I would come to know her would be through death. But even if I had another chance, I would still make the same choice. So when I unexpectedly returned to 8 years earlier, 6 years after my death, I chose that ending again. I knew she had come back too. I knew her closeness carried guilt and the desire to make up for what happened. But that was enough. It was still better than never having met her at all in the previous life. The years I once spent alone had felt unbearably long. Yet the 2 years I spent knowing her were the first time I felt how brief time could be. If I was destined never to become the one she loved, then becoming someone she would never forget for the rest of her life wasn't such a bad outcome either. I didn't actually remember what the criminal looked like, nor did I know his license plate. But I remembered that before reaching that intersection, he had thrown several beer cans out the car window. He had been drinking while driving. That was the only piece of information I could use to stop him before Anna reached him. So when I saw him toss another beer can from the car again, I sped up and honked. Unexpectedly, it seemed to trigger something in him. He immediately swerved toward a nearby plaza. As I accelerated and cut across his path to block him, the thought surfaced at the worst possible moment, the movie I never finished watching. I would probably never know how it ended. Late that spring, I took leave from school to visit my mother at the hospital. The room was quiet. She was still asleep. I walked to the other side, about to sit down and read, when I noticed a plate of freshly cut fruit on the bedside table, and beside it, a pure white paper crane folded by hand. I paused. My mother woke, smiling gently, and said, "Anna made that for me."
At this point, my love life is a public service announcement. Free of charge.